Hello, everybody, and welcome back to what is a very delicate episode. So, I actually have been doing a bunch of colonial hardware lately, and what we're going to be making is a three-prong fork. Now, look, everybody and their brother does the two-prong fork because it's easy. You basically split it out and two prongs. Three prongs is a real problem, especially back in the day when you did not have a hacksaw to cut those tines. So there's a couple different ways to make the three tine fork, but this one's kind of unique. I have an original fork, and the wild thing is that the fork is actually been slit and drifted, and the two outside prongs have been run through it and then forge welded into place. Um, so this is going to be a super delicate forge weld, and it's going to be very tricky. So, since all the exciting things are going to happen on the pointy end, what I'm doing here is I'm actually working the backside first. I'm going to put the hanging hook and I'm working on the handle. Now, this is round stock that we're starting with. It's 3/8 in diameter, even though I normally start with square stock. And I thought I might be able to hammer this out to make it look nicer with a little bit of swell, but that didn't work. It kind of sucked. So it's flat. It didn't swell like I wanted to, but I was dead into it. I was committed, so that's what we went with. But here we are actually making the first fork of the fork. It's the center tine, and I'm going to need a relatively sharp taper for this. The original that I have is kind of blunt, and it makes me think that it's not for barbecuing or meat. They had a lot of these types of hooks for like nails and lifting things, whereas today, of course, all our meat forks are super thin tines. So in order to make this something I can use on the grill, I'm going to need a much more slender taper than the original that I'm starting from. So everything has to be square. Remember that you cannot draw out in the round. You always draw out in the square. And a lot of times when we do these things, we end up actually rounding the tines. It's just a personal preference. Doesn't matter that much. So let's see. We got one more go here to really pull this thing out. So what you see here, this is a shorter piece. This is going to be the two outside tines. So there's actually only two pieces of metal. There's the one piece that is the center, that is the handle and the middle tine, and then there is essentially a crossbar that acts as the two outside tines. What I'm doing is I'm drawing the tapers on both of these guys to start with because I don't want to do I want to do as little work as possible when it comes to having this thing forge welded. Because here's the trick. This next thing, we're going to have to split that middle bar using a chisel, open it up using a drift, and then very carefully insert this piece in the middle. Now, here's the trick. I have to heat that whole thing up just to the forge welding temperature and get it to tack. That's going to be a problem because this is very small metal. There are very sharp tips, and of course, with those sharp tips, that means they're going to heat faster. So there's a huge risk of just melting this thing to pieces. Now, Mr. Jonathan was kind enough to help me with this. I did not have the right chisel for this. This is actually a type of caping chisel that I use. So it's kind of like, it's not the greatest in the world. It will work, and we needed to get some videos done, so I am making do. I will cut from one side and then from the other to keep it even. And once it's been slit all the way through, let's see. Oh, one more cut, cutting from the other side. But once we cut all the way through with this thing, then we're going to have to hit it with the drift. Now, the drift in this case is simply a piece of 3/8 bar stock that has a long taper on the front and a short taper on the back. It's made out of mild steel. In fact, it's out of the same stock that I used to make the fork. But you can see it's opened up. We're ready to go. And now we're going to take another heat. We're going to come out. And I'm using a makeshift punch block there. And we start driving the drift through. And oh crap, Why did my editor leave a mistake in like that? So now, there's things called like dial a punch and things like that it's a good reason that all your work should absolutely be like fixed down. But I made it happen, so there we go. See, drift went through it, and now check this out. We're going to have another mistake left in. Uh-oh, things have hung up, which means I actually need to drift it through the other side. So my piece didn't fit, so I'll knock it out. I'll take another heat and I'll drift it one more time from the other side. I thought I was going to be able to get away with it. I was not. Excellent. But there we go. So now we have our crossbar in there, and it's just kind of floating. And this is where it gets tricky because this forge weld is going to be super delicate. Trying to slowly bring it up to heat to a temperature that it will fuse. So right here, I'm just tapping it, just getting it to stick and forming it down. I will reflux it, go back into the fire, and we'll take a slightly higher heat. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this is not a structural weld. Now, I could like hammer this thing down and really just bash it, but it's going to be a barbecue fork. So I'm trying to keep the amount of force that I'm putting into that weld commensurate with the work that it's going to be doing. I mean, if we were like making a weld for an axe head, I would cook it. I'd really come up high, but not with this. Now, one other thing that I want to point out is that basically I had an original and I decided to make this out of it. There's really no measuring. This is all about as freehand as it gets. I don't even have the right tools to do this. Like from the hammer to the piece that you just saw, like I am really just pulling this one out of my hind end. You're going to notice with a lot of the original hardware that very little is usually lined up. I mean, it functions, it's just not pretty. And I would imagine that in the old blacksmith shops, if somebody came in for like, a second, say, hey, we need a blacksmith fork like now, it would very much be like this. They would be using tools to make it that were not intended to make it. For example, this is a cutting hardy that I'm using to actually straighten those tines. If I really had the tooling I wanted for this, I'd have a piece that was the absolute right width to set those tines, and it would be made just for this item. But, again, we didn't have that kind of time. It's a one-off, and so we're pulling this one out of our hind end. So again, the tines are always a bit of a fight if you don't have a good jig. And there was a little bit more curvature than I wanted in there. So this is a lot of tippy tapping. Now my OCD is going crazy because I really want this thing to be symmetrical, but it's just not going to happen. So I think I'll take another couple of heats, beat on it some more until I finally say, okay, good enough. It's going to be able to stab a pork loin. Setting it over the horn to give it a little bit of curvature. And looks like a pretty effective butt scratcher there. Now, one thing I don't like about this is we started with round stock, and that means that there's none of that really good hammer texture on the shank, and I always hate that. That's one of the reasons I usually start with the square stock is because it really does look super hand forged. If you start with a round stock, it's just not going to have the same effect. Now, if you really want to find a way to kill yourself, use a wire wheel, especially with lots of little thin parts. And buddy, let me tell you something. When you're actually wire wheeling something with a hook on it, super dangerous. But nothing beats a large wire wheel like this for removing the scale and really giving that piece a proper buff. Now, one of the other things I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to hit it with a little bit of linseed oil and cook it. And there is one hand-forged meat poker. And let's see, yeah, not too bad. So, who we got? Oh, here's the help. Putting it to use. Fan-freaking-tastic. Pork loins on the grill. Now, I kind of wish I had the photograph of the before and after. Oh, no, you did. You guys, my editor got it in there. Awesome. Look at that. Now here's the truth of the matter. Those pork loins wouldn't have been that good unless he'd used the right fork. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. Hope you like the new video format, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week. See you next time.